Hello. Thank you for the opportunity of having me here. So what I want to speak to talk about is pretty much my experience, my work experience, my experience as a software engineer within my career, how I got started in computer science, and also how my upbringing brought me up to all those experiences. So probably you don't know, but I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was actually born on the north side. And interesting about that is, kind of like a poor area. So you would have never thought that, people like me would work at companies like Microsoft, like Citi, in the future. So, from my upbringing, my mom didn't work. My dad was actually a pastor. So it's not like we had a lot of opportunity, and my parents never, at the same time, never gave me that, not, I wouldn't say opportunity, but they never pushed me to say, to study hard or do this in school. So from a young age, I just went to school and I was actually always interested in math. That was like my main attraction. I was always interested in math. I did really good in math. And, kind of skipping elementary school, middle school, I actually ended up once I got to high school, I actually went to Bayside High School in Palm Beach, Florida. And I went to school late. It was because we ended up moving. So school had already started, and the only class elective that they had available was a technology class. And at that time, I didn't know much about technology, so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna take the course because I needed an elective, so that was the course. And I guess once I got to that course, that was like the whole substratum, pretty much the foundation of how I got started with technology. And in that course, we actually, probably in the first month or two, they put Triumph of the Nerds. I don't know if you know that documentary,
No.
but they put the documentary. It's pretty much a documentary about how the whole computers, how computers came to be, how Microsoft and Apple became big companies. And for some reason, that documentary changed my whole life. I was like, I want to be like them. And I think from that point on, that's what started my interest in technology. I was like, this sounds interesting. This looks interesting, what they're doing, how they're changing the world. There, Steve Jobs spoke about design, and that was the foundation of his company. And for some reason, there's something about that documentary that completely blew my mind. And I was like, I want to get into tech. So I remember that was freshman year, 10th grade. I started going to the library and I started renting out programming books. And I started teaching myself how to program. So one of the first languages I taught myself was like Unix/Linux. And I would do like scripts within the computer, managing the file system within the Mac that I had at that time. And I was doing these little small programs. Eventually, by the time I was a senior, I was actually coding real programs, working with classes and objects. I wasn't like the greatest programmer at all, but I could program a decent amount. So by the time I would go to college, I had already that experience. But coming back to my upbringing, when I was in high school, like I had said, my parents never pushed me to either go to college either. So I was like, oh, I'm a good programmer, but my parents never pushed me to study computer science, study math, or do this, do that, apply here, apply there. So I didn't have that motivation academically, I would say, to maybe apply to a good computer science program. So I ended up just going to my community college, which was actually in Brevard, and which was BCC. And I went there for about a semester or two, and I was doing pretty horrible. I didn't really care about school, and I was like, I know how to program. Let me actually do this thing. And something just clicked. I moved to Orlando, and that's when I went to Seminole State. And then when I went to Seminole State, that was my second semester, and that's when I started, taking all these higher level math classes, really focusing on, computers and computer science. And right after, obviously in Seminole State College, you're taking the generals. So I wasn't actually taking my upper level courses. But then once I go to UCF, and actually once I go to UCF, that's when I also at the same time end up getting a job offer as a math tutor in the Seminole State campus. So not only is my interest in college the computer science part, but like I said earlier, the fact that I love mathematics a lot, always, I think it was that problem solving aspect. And that also transferred within computer science. And that's why I was always interested in computer science at the end of the day. Because even after watching that documentary, if I would have, done programming and be like, oh, this is boring, I probably would have left it. But I think the fact that the problem solving and you can build anything from scratch was just so powerful, pretty useful, powerful, in a sense. And then, yeah, once I go to UCF, after I graduate from Seminole State, I decide to major in computer science and math, both of them at the same time, actually, because I was really interested in computer science. And then for some reason, taking Calc 1, Calculus 2, Calculus 3, I was just so um, math kind of blew my mind in a sense. I didn't even know you could do that with math. And I was like, oh, integrals and differential equations. And I was mind blown. And I was like, I want to study this. This is awesome. So my first semester at UCF, I remember taking linear algebra. And that's when you're going from like calculus to like a different world. And I was like, is this what I really want to do? But I loved it. I did love it. And I was like, all right, I'm going to keep on majoring in math and stick with computer science. But the thing is, since I already know how to program, when I actually went to UCF, I had no issue in the first couple courses because I already knew how to program. Actually, a lot of people were constantly asking me for questions. And, even for people listening to this, they might be like, oh, should I do computer science or software engineering? The way I picture, software engineering in general is software engineering you're building it's like your civil engineering, industrial engineering, you're actually building something like constructing, where computer science I feel like is more problem solving. I feel like it's a subset of mathematics. Yes, you have to learn how computers work fundamentally, but at the end of the day, a lot of problem solving is just mathematical problems, and you're just using computers to solve them. And I feel like that's what attracted me so much. So I had no issue. But once I started getting to the higher level mathematics course or computer science courses and mathematics courses, then I felt like I couldn't handle both at the same time. And I was only taking four, and I was taking four courses. And in my mind, I was like, I either drop one of the majors or just stop taking so many courses. And I did both. So I technically dropped math because I was like, I love math. This is, so different from anything I've done. Writing proofs makes you just think differently and abstractly. And, but I, I was thinking more of, hey, what am I going to do when I graduate? Which is be a software engineer. And that's why I stuck with computer science. So from there, I dropped math instead of taking four computer science courses, which in general was a lot. And I feel like the hardest part of computer science, there's just so many variables because if you're not a good programmer, you're going to struggle a lot, not only with certain assignments, but coding. Sometimes you can code for, let's say the assignment is supposed to take you 5 hours. It can take you 10 hours, but maybe because there's this error that you're not even seeing, that could be, for example, maybe you're missing a comma and you spend an hour looking for that comma, for example. So you feel like, wow, I just spent an hour and I didn't really learn anything. So that can be kind of demotivating in a sense. So for in general, the way that computer science is you have to be very analytical. You have to love in general problem solving. And like I said, it's completely different from software engineering, which some a lot of times people can say, oh, when I go to a role in software engineering, the interview process is different or the real world is different. And it is because software engineering is not per se computer science. So while I'm at UCF, and actually when you're in UCF and you're doing your computer science major, you can only take computer science, intro to C, computer science one, discrete mathematics up to a certain point. Then you have to take this thing called the CS foundation exam. If you can't pass that foundation exam, then they don't let you take any more courses. So I was really studying for this exam, and usually the passing rate, I'm pretty sure is still as low, but it was 50%.
Wow.
And yeah, so I took it. Luckily, I passed on my first try. There's people, and the issue is that let's say I failed, I would have to retake it every semester because they only offer it once a semester. And let's say you fail to a point that you can't take any more courses because if you don't pass this foundation exam, they don't allow you to take any higher level computer science courses. So I was lucky enough to pass, studied a lot, and then so we're in 2013, and I'm really trying to graduate at that point, and I'm trying to see how my life is going to play. And I'm like, currently a mathematics tutor at Seminole State College. I'm about to graduate soon. I should be applying to internships. And, unfortunately, I didn't, get any opportunities at that time. I feel like maybe I should have applied to more internships. But at the end of the day, that didn't stop me from having a great career, you know. So, we go to 2014. That's my graduation year. I start taking, all these electives because that was what was left. And I graduated December 2014, and then right from the spring is when I started applying to a bunch of places. I started applying um, to all these firms, and it's everywhere in Orlando because at that time obviously I was UCF, so I was in Orlando, and I was applying to firms in Chicago, firms in New York. I didn't care if I was staying, necessarily in Orlando. I just wanted a good job to be a software engineer. And the thing is that at that time, I also didn't know how broad software engineering is. Because when you think about it, you have, full stack engineering, front end, back end, mobile, network engineer, IT. But at that point, I didn't really know that spectrum. So once I graduated, I actually ended up getting a job offer at Deloitte, which, that was probably one of the funnest jobs I've ever had. And when I actually got to Deloitte, I became a full stack engineer. So for those who don't know, full stack engineers, you're working on, let's say you have a web application like YouTube, you're working on the front end, on the back end, building like APIs to transfer data so you can also display it, and then working with the database. So it's kind of that whole spectrum. And I was really enticed and really engaged with the work. So I was like, I really want to do this. And working at Deloitte, for a lot of you that don't know, is like consulting firm. So actually, when I started working there, I ended up getting projects to travel. So a lot of the times I had to go to a certain client site to work on their projects. So I would fly every Monday to the client site and fly every Thursday back home. So one of the projects actually that I ended up working on was I had a project in Michigan which was they wanted all businesses to do all their taxes online, and that was kind of the system that we were building. And that was a full stack engineer there where I was creating those UIs. I was actually building like the calculator. So if you're a business in Michigan and you're doing your calculations online and all that mathematic equation, that was pretty much me, unless things got updated. But I was the one that ended up creating the application and creating those APIs to bring out that data that you see and retrieving information from the database. So that was about the first 2-3 years I would say at Deloitte that I was in that, and not the first year, but when the second year and the third year, I was in that project. And that's when I was like, I really want to continue doing this, and I'm, interested in this field. I feel like some people get burnt out, or some people are like, oh, this is not for me. But one thing about software that before I continue is you do have to study a lot outside of work. And the reason you have to do this is because there's just so much to learn. Obviously, you have, let's say I'm going to build a product. You have to learn that language. So you have a front end language, then you might have a different back end language. You have a different database language. Then you have the version control. When I have let's say I'm writing the code, I save it. You have to save it in a Git branch. Then that has to go all the way to development and UAT and production. And you have to understand all those systems. So you have to spend a lot of time. And actually for me, it took me 2 years. I had like this epiphany where it took me 2 years to I finally understand it like software clicked. And maybe a lot of people won't say this, but the first year I was so lost. A lot of the things didn't make sense. People would just give me tasks and I would ask for help all the time. I didn't have that. I didn't understand how to really build software. And I feel like it took me about 2 years to fully understand how these objects just work with each other, how everything just talks with each other. And in general, if you feel, I mean, if you're watching this and you feel like, oh, I mean, I don't get this, or a lot of times I need help, it's gonna take time, but there will be this day where it just clicks and you're just like, oh, I can just build anything by myself now. Like I don't need help anymore. And for me, it took me about that 2 year mark, which was very, very interesting. And then I was at Deloitte in total within the time I was at Deloitte was about 4 years and a half. So I was there for 4 years and a half. And actually, while I was at Deloitte, at probably my fourth year, I ended up meeting this guy at my church that I was at, and he became like either like a VP or like a head, like head of management at this company called Trilogy Education Services. And he was like, "Oh, hey, we have this boot camp that we're introducing to all these colleges. We need instructors and assistants. Would you be willing to interview?" And I said, "Yeah." So I kind of went through the interview process, and I ended up becoming a teaching assistant for the UCF coding bootcamp while I was working at Deloitte. And that was another experience that completely changed, the way I viewed software. And I felt like, just like Feynman says, teaching is the number one way you learn.
Yes.
Like it is. And after doing the UCF bootcamp, I felt like it helped me more than it helped the students because everybody had different questions and I had to learn how to like solve every single question. And in your mind, you have to build all these scenarios. And for me, the way I see things is kind of visually in my mind, where I have to have everything as like an architecture, and then I pull things apart and pull things in. I don't know if you think about things like this, but for me, that's the way I see anything, either with software or with architecture. I mean, you can tell me, oh, hey, let's build YouTube, for example. In my mind, I'm like, hey, I have a server. Then I go in the server. This is what you need. Outside of the server, maybe we're working with 10 people. Maybe next year there's 100 million people. Maybe we would need another server, another load balancer. And I kind of go in and out of these architectures. And I feel like for me, that's what kind of works within both computer science and thinking about math in a mathematical way. Even though it can be kind of abstract because there's things in math that you can't necessarily conceptualize. But for me, maybe that's why I did a little bit better in computer science. So the boot camp was very awesome. I do think if anyone wants to do a boot camp, I feel like most people that did well were people that already had degrees. Because when you already have a degree, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like math or computer science, you already know that how much you have to study. You already know how much you have to put in the hard work. And I feel like the students that already had a degree were just, oh, hey, I have a degree, I'm working, I just want to change my career. And those were the type of people that I felt did the best job versus people who had never gone to school or just high school and like, oh, I want to get into this. I feel like a lot of them didn't know how much work it required to do this. Um, but in general, I think the whole program was amazing. Another thing I would say is learning all this in 6 months is, a short time because in general, like I said, it took me I not only did I do computer science, it took me 2 years in the workforce to actually understand building software and to just be able to do things by myself. And I feel like maybe 6 months is not a long time, but if you're smart enough, I think it is worth it. And I think if you have a degree, you feel like you can put all your time, I do think is worth it. Uh, you know, but at the end of the day, if you were to ask me a computer science degree or a boot camp, I would always go with the computer science degree just because that builds those problem solving skills that you need. Like a lot of companies, I do understand because some companies hire just generalists and some companies hire specific people. Generalists, I understand because you're like, hey, I just want to find the smartest people. Come here, we'll tell you what to do, and you can solve it. And I completely understand that point. And there's also companies, but which will be like, oh, hey, I want you to be like an expert doing caching. And I understand that part as well. But in my opinion, computer science does teach those skills, and just like math and physics and all these other degrees that do that as well. But within the career software development, problem solving skills is probably one of the top things that you have to be comfortable with. And actually, another thing is test cases. Uh, Even right now, let's say I'm doing like a problem online, because sometimes I like to do problems online, like mathematical problems, to keep my like logical thinking skills, up to date. Sometimes when I'm not solving these problems, I'm missing test cases. Or even at work, if you're building something, maybe there's a bug, and there's not something you always have to think about. Am I missing a test case? And you have to think, you can't always make assumptions. You always have to have this, like I said, this architecture in your mind of, I'm building the software. Let's say you're creating a login, a password login. You have to think, what if someone presses enter, but they never put an input? What if someone only writes numbers and doesn't write an at sign? What if someone is trying to hack the database? So you have to have all these test cases. And you're, at the end of the day, you're not going to have every test case, and that's okay. But that can just give you an understanding of how difficult, software engineering can be at the end of the day. Because you have all these abstractions and all these things that people are able to do. And at the end of the day, people might want to hack your system, or people might are gonna write things. Let's say that in that input you put a password, you put a username, but you don't put a password. Can they still log in? Can they still not like log in? So those are cases you have to think about. So continuing back to my path, after Deloitte, I actually ended up going to another consulting firm for a little bit called Capgemini. But the funny thing is that right before Capgemini, I ended up interviewing with Disney, and I actually ended up getting. I technically got the offer, but the hiring manager was like, "Oh, hey, there was a hiring freeze. So once this hiring freeze is over, then maybe I can hire you." And I was like, "Okay, no worries. Obviously, things happen," and that was it. So I keep applying to other jobs because I said, who knows? Why would I just wait for for this role? And then I ended up getting the job offer at Capgemini, and I feel like that was the best thing that happened, because I got the job. I moved to Charlotte. They made me move to Charlotte, and I was in this role for only 5 months. But someone from Charlotte, because my next company that I worked for was Vanguard. Someone that was already in Charlotte reached out to me, and I was able to go to Vanguard. And that kind of made the whole transition of me going to Microsoft, I will explain, and coming here to New York. So when I was at um, Vanguard actually made me realize I was already interested in finance, but it made me really appreciate building financial products in the finance industry. And when I was there, I was like, you know what? I really want to work for either a bank or like a hedge fund. But okay, I'm gonna have to go back to college, because in college, when I was in college, I got introduced to this quantitative world of quant finance, and the book Flash Boys came out around that time. Talking about high frequency trading, and I really started reading books about quants and all these hedge funds, and I was really interested in this. And like I said, back in college, I was interested in math and computer science, and this was like this combination of computer science, math, statistics, where you can build these models, predict how the stock market is going to work, and then you kind of give them to developers to develop it. So that part of finance, I was really interested in. I got really interested in, but the thing is, if you want to be a quant, you most likely have to get a PhD, which was something that I didn't know. I didn't know if that was something I really wanted to do with my career. So I said that's something I'm interested in, but at the same time, you have these things called either quantitative developers, or which the quantitative developers actually code the models of the quants, and then most likely that algorithm or whatever you build either is given to the traders, or that just runs as a strategy. And but then you have the other side, which is the high frequency traders, which you don't necessarily rely on a quant. You just build those systematically um, uh, type systems that run by themselves and do all those, how, in Flashbooks they have those front running algorithms and all those things that people have heard about. So I was really already interested in that. So when now back to when I was at Vanguard, I was like, this is probably the space I want to stay in. Not necessarily maybe being a quant, but maybe like a quant developer in the future, or maybe working at a hedge fund as a high frequency trader. So when at Vanguard, actually, what I did was really interesting. We were building this system where all the advisors, Vanguard advisors would go and you can see all the mutual funds, all the ETFs that Vanguard had created and had, and then you would click on that ETF per se, and you would see all the details of the ETF. So you would see the performance, you would see the NAV, you would see was it actively managed, was it an index, and you can see the performance by quarters. You can see what the holdings were, and in general, it was really interesting to me. This was still like a full stack role where I would grab the data from the back end or from databases, build like this API. The API would send me all the data, and I would customize the website. So I kind of worked on, as a full stack engineer, worked on all those sides. So I was at Vanguard for about a year and a half, and that's when COVID hit, and I ended up getting reached out by someone in the Microsoft Charlotte office, actually. And they kind of reached out to me and they said, "Oh, hey, there's an opportunity here that we're looking for people. What do you want to apply?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm willing to apply." I interviewed, I think it was October 2020, or not October 2020. It was the summer 2020. I ended up starting October 2020. Then when I started, my manager was like, "Oh, hey, this position is remote. You can actually work from anywhere." And at that same time, my lease was going to end. And I was like, what should I do? Should I stay here in Charlotte or should I just go somewhere else? So at the time, my girlfriend told me, "Oh, hey, let's just pack our bags and just go anywhere." And I was like, all right, let's actually try DC for a little bit. So we packed our bags, the lease ended. We went to DC for about a month or two. We were staying in a hotel, trying to figure out if that's something we liked or not. And we had a great time in DC. And then we're like, let's go to New York. Let's see how it goes. So we actually ended up going to New York, and, we loved it. It was amazing. So the funny story is that we actually got here January 2021. And when we got here, everything here is super expensive. And at that time, I was still making Charlotte income because I hadn't transferred yet to the New York office because I was thinking of transferring when I settled down. So I was like, hey, I can't, even if I got transferred, you're going to have to work here as well for us to stay. So we were like, all right, well, I'll give you, I told her I'll give you 3 months. If you don't find a job, we're going to go back to Florida or back to Charlotte. And she was like, okay, cool, that works. The first month, she didn't find a job. Second month, she didn't find a job. The third month, we get to the last week. Oh. I promise you. And then the last week, it's a Sunday, and we're having a conversation. I said, this is the last week here in New York. You try to find a job. Things haven't worked out. You can't find anything. Unfortunately, it's not your fault. She had recently just graduated. So we were just going to go back. We planned, to go back that weekend, and we had everything set up. All our stuff was in my car. We're leaving this weekend. Tuesday, she ends up getting an offer.
Oh my God.
And by Thursday, we have an apartment.
Oh, wow.
And I know. So everything we had planned completely and utterly just got abolished and destroyed. We stayed in New York, and I ended up getting a transfer from Microsoft. So I started going to the Microsoft office here in New York. And the thing is, when I was interviewing for Microsoft and I ended up joining the team that they had available at that time, because the way they do it is which is weird. I don't really like the way a lot of companies do this. Maybe I would change my mind if I could think about it more, but the way they do it is they hire you, they interview you, they ask you like mathematical puzzles and questions, then you got to solve them, programming it. You solve that. After you pass that interview, then you have to interview for a team. It's not like, which is weird because you would think, oh, hey, this company wants me. It's because a certain team wants to hire a specific person. It's no, we're just gonna interview you, you pass this, now we're gonna find you a team. If we don't find you a team, then you're just not gonna get an offer, which is kind of weird. But I ended up speaking to this hiring manager, and he's like, we have a data engineering role. Would this be something you're interested in? And I was like, yeah, I told him I don't have a lot of data engineering experience. Almost all of my experiences with full stack, but I'm very interested in this. He said, all right, come and join. So I went in and I started doing data engineering, which was completely different from full stack. And I think the first 6 months, I was so lost. I didn't understand how anything worked because for me, in my whole head, everything had this structure. You had the front end, you had the back end, you had the database, how these connects. I already knew how to put these applications on websites, how the DevOps work. But with data engineering, the way it works is technically you ingest data from this place, and then you grab that data. It kind of goes to like this ETL process of like extracting it, transforming it, and then you put it in like a data warehouse or a data lake, and then other teams grab that data from that data lake or that data warehouse, and then they do things that they need to do. So that was completely different, and at the same time, you're working with the cloud because all that is within it was in the Azure cloud since that's what Microsoft owns and works with. So I had to learn a lot of Azure Cloud. We're improving the system, making the system better, making it faster. So the 2 years and a half, the 2 years and a half that I was there, that's what I did in general. And to tell you the truth, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed data engineering. I feel like I've learned so much in my whole career, not only, full stack, but also data engineering. And I'm just like, and there's so much more to learn in these things. I feel like I just have caught just a glimpse of these things because there's so much, and I'm still learning so much more. And even within, full stack engineering, I've been reading, this book about like caching, and caching is like a mechanism where, let's say you want to retrieve data from a database, but you've already retrieved some data. It's kind of, you don't have to go all the way to the database anymore. You can just retrieve it. It's closer. So then the system retrieves it faster. But if it doesn't find it, then it goes to the database. But technically, everything has a cache. Like the DNS has a cache. The web browser has a cache. Like everything has a cache. And it's just so interesting to me how computers are built. The more like I dig deeper and deeper and deeper, is so interesting how all these things just work together, and I think that's, besides the problem solving part from computer science, I feel like understanding also the computer part is very interesting, and makes you just realize how all these systems work together, and how we built these computers, and now we have these networks, and now the networks talk to each other, and it's just very interesting to talk about and realize. So after being at Microsoft for 2 years and a half, ended up also getting contacted by Citi, actually. And the way they did it was also kind of the same way they did it with Microsoft, where they kind of hired me without being on a team. So I went to Citi, and then I spoke to this director, and he was like, "Oh, hey, interview with a bunch of my SVPs. They manage some teams, and let me know what team you want." So I kind of interviewed with a couple of them, and I selected one of the teams, and that's the team I'm working for. So technically what the team does, which is actually rather interesting, is, we ingest data into our application is kind of is like credit default swaps and collateralized CLOs, which are collateralized loan obligations. And we kind of put them in this application, and we do calculations, make sure all the data's there. We're able to export that data, and we kind of give our application to the traders who are able to trade on these credit default swaps or trade on these CLOs as they wish. So it's been very interesting, which in this case, I'm very interested because this is more now in the avenue of what I was talking to you about, which is the finance,
Finance, yeah.
which is what I kind of wanted to do. So I kind of have ended up where I always wanted to be
Finally.
at the end of the yeah, which is very interesting. And
Yeah.
it's just been a crazy roller coaster, because at the end of the day, I like I said, with the whole Disney thing and the whole staying here in New York, a lot of things you just don't plan or you just don't have control over. You just live. And for me, things have just worked out, and I don't know what it is. At the end of the day, I've put in the work, which I can say I put in the work. I can also say that I've studied a lot, and that's all I can do from my part. The next thing is wait and see what happens. And I think everybody's going to get multiple opportunities. There's going to be opportunities. Actually, going back to when I was Deloitte, when I was at Deloitte, probably year three, I actually got contacted by Google, and they're like, "Oh, hey, interview with us. We want you to interview," and I completely bombed it, and that made me realize if I was ready, I got the opportunity. I just wasn't ready. And I knew from there on, always be ready because those opportunities can come at any point in time, even if you aren't ready, even if you don't know when they're going to come. But if you're ready, if I was ready, I probably could have gotten the job, but I didn't because I wasn't. And then when I think about all these times in my career when I've gotten the opportunities, I was ready at that time and I ended up getting those opportunities. And a lot of times when I didn't get those roles, sometimes things don't work out because they don't. But at the end of the day, I always try to be on top of things and ready for any opportunity. But I'm happy in general with my career, how my career has advanced, and I'm happy that I did, kind of computer science. Did it matter that I did computer science? I actually don't think so, because when I actually got to Deloitte, they didn't really care that I did computer science. They were just like, we just want to hire people that are smart and are interested in coding. So I feel like if I would have studied physics or I would have studied math or economics, I still think I probably could have had gotten the job. Um, I do think at this point in time, degrees still matter. I do think that. I know that's always a debate, but I do feel if you want to get in this industry, you still need a degree, but you need to show that you're still interested in the field. Um, and unfortunately, we are living in times where a lot of companies are laying off, which I don't know if you've heard, with the rise of AI, Amazon has laid off a
Mm.
bunch of people, Microsoft has laid off a bunch of people, Meta has too. So right now it is kind of not a great time to be graduating. A lot of people are looking for roles and they can't find it. So, I mean, getting, I don't know if you even want to get to that topic, but it's weird because actually I'll get there. Let's talk about it real quick. So, how Jay Powell, was raising interest rates.
Hmm.
And then he wants to take all this money away from the system, and then tech is laying off because uh there was so many supposed growth, which never happened. So now the thing is, and unemployment is an all-time low.
Hmm.
So if unemployment is an all-time low, but everybody in tech is getting laid off, that means that everybody that was in tech, it being a PM or recruiters or even some tech workers, have to leave tech,
Right.
because there has to be an equilibrium. And right now there's too much here, but every other service needs people. And
Except
Jay
tech.
Powell is going to, yes, it's like tech. Yeah, yeah. And if you look at, we need teachers, we need police officers, we need firefighters, we need all these others. Like I said, unemployment is at 3.6%.
That's so low.
But yes, it's so
It's so
low, which is
low. It's
crazy.
crazy.
And then, but tech keeps firing people. So what the thing is, what are you gonna do? And I've been seeing on LinkedIn, all these people saying I haven't found jobs in weeks and months. And I think it's just gonna be something for our generation that a lot of people are just gonna have to they're gonna have to eventually leave tech and go to one of these jobs that they don't want to do because I for some reason, maybe during COVID, all these big tech companies were like, oh, hey, we're going to see so much growth. they completely overhired. So they technically what they did was they pulled all these people from all these service jobs, they pulled them into tech, and now they don't need them anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and they're gonna have to go back.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the main issue that I'm seeing right now. And I don't know how this is gonna get resolved, but when you really think about the fact that, Powell even this week said, hey, we're gonna probably continue raising interest rates, 25 basis points more, 50 basis points,
Mm-hmm.
and and unemployment still at 3.6%, you're just like,
Yeah, I know.
whoa.
I
It's
know.
just
I
it blows
know.
your mind.
It's so low compared to like 2009, 2010. It's just such a
Yes.
different era then, It just because I follow finance
Yeah.
all the time. I watch all that stuff. I'm really into
Yeah.
finance. Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. And it's yeah, mind-boggling to me. And like I said, my like I said, um my interest has been, computer science, mathematics, and even with finance. And now I'm learning even more, which is really interesting. But yeah, I just, in general, I love, like I said from the beginning, math was my first love. I ended up getting into tech. Tech was technically my second love, which, I don't know what my future holds. Because also for my future, I always think of, do I want to be a manager, or do
Mm-hmm.
I want to stay as an individual contributor, which is usually someone that just stays coding. And I don't know if I just want to manage, because when I think about managing people, it's like I'm not going to be able to code as much and build these systems and get even better. Because the way I see it is, my mind is, even though I'm close to a decade in this industry, there's so much to learn,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to continue learning. So right now, I'm going maybe the individual contributor route, which is like, I want to keep on coding and I want to stay coding for a couple more years. Maybe I'll change my mind, but I think, and that's something a lot of us, at the end of the day, have to decide: are you going to be someone who's eventually going to manage and become someone who, either becomes like a CFO or a COO or CTO, or are you going to? But the thing is, if you stay as an individual contributor, that doesn't mean that you're not going to be um, opaque in a sense in the company. Like, you're gonna, if you put in the work, you should know enough to write blogs, to write books, to make impact in your organization, even to make impact out of your organization through other companies. So you should be seen uh, in many ways. And when I think about someone who, goes from my role to, you know, because usually the way they have it in a lot of tech companies is you're a software engineer one, a mid software engineer, a senior software engineer, then you're staff. And after staff, you're either senior staff, distinguished, and then usually a lot of them have fellow at the top. And some of the fellows that I've seen either on LinkedIn or on YouTube that have, gone to conferences, they've written books, they do blogs all the time, or they've actually have done an open source where a lot of companies are using that open source in their companies. So they're making an impact on that, on those software. And that makes me, that's like, it's like kind of doing research. And a lot of people even do research too. It's like, that's kind of the avenue that I'm thinking of maybe going, because it just doesn't stop here where I'm at. You have that decision to decide where you want to go. And, a lot of, even like Microsoft has this whole research. Um, Actually, here in the New York office, they have two offices. The main one in Times Square, which I went to, was mostly for the software engineers, for the business, for everyone else. And then and everybody that was doing research and development was in this other office in Soho. So I actually ended up going there once because there was like this event, and I met like all these people who had PhDs, and they were working with like ML and AI. And I was like, dude, this is crazy. And they were actually publishing papers through Microsoft, not
Yeah.
necessarily through the university. So I don't know if it's like they got sponsorship. I don't know exactly how that works, but they were writing these papers through Microsoft, and a lot of people are able to see this. And one cool thing that Microsoft is doing, I don't know if they're still doing it, is they create. I don't know if they created or they bought, but there's this program called Lean, where they want to put every proof that has ever existed. You have to Google this. Every proof that's ever existed, starting from the beginning, if I'm not mistaken, putting it in the code. The code can mark it as right or wrong.
Oh,
And then if okay, because the thing is, if you okay, let's say you do a dissertation, who's to say that something in your paper is wrong?
right.
Not many people.
Right. Only a few
Who's
people.
actually gonna read that?
Right.
Yes. So the thing is, this program is gonna put so many papers that when you actually complete your thesis, your dissertation, you're gonna put all those calculations in this program, and it'll technically tell you if you're right or wrong. And also, let's say your paper has a reference to another theory. What if that theory is actually wrong? Then
Mm-hmm.
your paper is wrong.
Right.
And then is this like domino effect where then all these papers will be wrong. And this and I just found this out recently, and you got to Google it. It's called Lean. And
Lean.
I was like, and Microsoft actually owns this product that people are currently working on, and it's just so interesting to me that they're working on this. And I was like, and I guess that's another way math is evolving at the end of the day.
It's cool. It's cool.
Yeah. So, what else? If you have any questions, um, Q&A.
Yeah. So like, I just feel like when I look at your career and I think about you, I think about someone who, I mean, you say, you had a lot of opportunities and you took them and you got lucky, but I also think that you have a lot of like, desire,
Yes.
and so where does
Yeah.
that come
So,
from for you? What gives you that drive? Because a lot of people don't have that. That's what I think. That's what separates you
yeah,
from a lot of
yeah,
people. I mean, I just what is it that drives
yeah.
you?
Okay, to tell you the truth, when I see in going back to my story from the beginning, I wasn't born in this place where, my parents put me in private school or said, "Hey, you're gonna do tutoring." They just let me be and do whatever I wanted. And a lot of people that come from, you know, from that north side Milwaukee, most of them ended up in gangs, ended up doing drugs. But I also question myself, why did something like watching a documentary of Triumph of the Nerds motivate me and not a gang? And to tell you the truth, I can't tell you why. I don't know why certain things motivate me over others. One thing that I've learned that I really learned earlier in life was the motivation for me also and through my failure. Like each time I failed, that would actually motivate me, which is really weird. And I don't think I've really met that many people like that. Is usually is that something bad happens and they kind of pull back. Or for me, that's kind of like a motivator. Actually, my last semester in college, which was right before I got the job at Deloitte, this was in July. Um, I was going to UCF because it was my last semester, and I was completely broke. And I actually ended up losing my job. Well, I didn't lose my job because I lost my car. Then I couldn't go to my job, so I left the tutoring because I didn't have a job, and I literally had and I couldn't afford my phone. So that July, I didn't have a phone either, and I had 7 cents to my name.
Wow.
I graduated, and actually, I was so my last semester, the last 3 weeks of my time at UCF, I was actually taking the bus to UCF from my apartment in Altamont, and then so technically it was Winter Springs, but it was like really close to Altamont. But I was just taking the bus. And once I graduated, I was like, I need a job. I have 7 cents in my bank account. I don't have a phone. I don't have anything. I don't have a car. And and for some reason I always thought, things are gonna work out. Like I never got depressed. I For me, I always felt like I had a positive attitude. I just felt like things were always gonna work out, and I ended up getting the job at Deloitte close to about 3 weeks later. I ended up getting the notice that I ended up getting the job, which made me really happy. But when I look back at my life, I don't necessarily know what motivated me because when I look at maybe people who I hung out with or places I was with, everybody made, let's say, the left choice, and for some reason I just made the right choice. Um, you know, and I don't know why. I I I, I actually couldn't tell you why.
Positive attitude, though. I mean, that's good. That's true. Like, I've
Yeah,
always
yeah,
seen you as a
yeah.
positive person, right? You always come in smiling. I just watched
Yeah.
the Arnold documentary. I don't know if you've seen that on Netflix with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
No, I haven't.
And one of the things I got from the documentary was that he just always had a positive attitude. You know, he would come in there and he would just say, "Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
going to do this." He just wouldn't let anything hold him back. You know, just coming in there with a positive attitude and just, you know, like you said, failures are part of life. I mean, it's like that
Yeah.
'90s
No, that's
song.
true.
Yeah,
I I also feel like I always took a realistic view of life. Like when I even since I was a little kid, it's like, hey, we're humans. We grow up, we live life, and we die. Everything for me was just realistic. Each time something happened, I wasn't shocked. Obviously, I feel like I'm emotional, and you know I am emotional, but but if everything is from a real from that realistic perspective, of you are gonna fail, you are gonna get your heart broken, or these things are gonna happen. That's part of what everyone lives. You have the normal, statistics, a normal distribution. Every Most people are gonna land in the normal distribution within 1 sigma or 2 sigma, and that's gonna happen to everyone. There's gonna be the super small percentage where most people are gonna have a really really great life and bad things might not happen, and this really really small portion where most bad things are going to happen, unfortunately. But for most of us, it's going to be kind of the same ritual. You're born, you go to elementary school, middle school, high school, maybe you get your heart broken, you go to college, you find a job, you kind of go through a corporate ladder, some of your family members die, you grow old, and nothing surprised me. Some, some people are going to, and like I said, I was, ever since I ended up getting many opportunities, a lot of times those are all the times those opportunities didn't go through was because I wasn't prepared, which always I grilled into my mind, always be prepared because you never know. Once the opportunity comes, if you're not ready, you're not going to get it, and you don't know when the opportunity is going to arise again. So that was and has always been my mentality at the end of the day. And I don't feel either like I'm the smartest person either. There's so many other smarter people that I've met. But if I were to compare myself to another smarter person, I'll be like, yeah, he can probably learn that faster. Yeah, he can probably come up with a better idea. But if we're put somewhere, I can probably outlast him. I feel like I have that
that's right.
that diligence. My diligence is gonna go so far that you know is gonna be unstoppable. I feel like at the end of the day, and things do happen, but it is having a positive mentality, which not everybody has that, and like I said, I it's not something I feel like I was just born with that positive mindset. But even if you don't have that positive mindset, always try to have that positive mindset because think of all the times that you were down, but you're back up now. And
Hmm.
now that you're back up, enjoy that season that is up and it's gonna go back down, but enjoy the season and seasons comes and season go.
It's brilliant. So good. So deep.
Yeah.
So deep, man. It's so deep.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
yeah.
so
So
good. This is so good. Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome, man. Cool.
um and if there's any questions you have about me being in college, computer science,
Yeah.
software engineering, you
What
can.
was your favorite place to work and why? Well, I mean, if you can say, I know because you have a job
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
so you want to
No,
say
no,
that's
yeah.
your. So.
Well, no, I've only been at this company for like 3 weeks, so I can't say. So
Okay.
let's, yeah. So I can't even make an assumption. I can't say
Okay.
anything. But based on Deloitte, Capgemini, Vanguard, and Microsoft, the funnest was Deloitte, and the reason it was the funnest was because I love to travel and I was able to travel to so many places. They gave me the opportunity to go to all these client sites, to work on awesome projects. And the thing with Deloitte too is it's not like a regular company where you come to my team and you kind of just stay there. You go to Deloitte, you can decide what project you want to work on. So, so technically, once you're in at Deloitte, you have to interview again for our internal project. So you interview, if you pass that project, then you're in that project. You're in that project, let's say for a year or two. Let's say that project's done, then you can technically look for another project. And you have the opportunity a lot of times to choose different projects, and they can be in different states. So I felt at that time that I was going from job to job, even though I was still within Deloitte. So that was fun. There was a lot of free food a lot of the time. When you were traveling, everything, company paid for it. I would go to all these events, all these conferences. I went to like AWS reInvent every year. I would go to like Google Cloud every year. So I was part of this community. I felt like at Deloitte where it was something I really enjoyed. And also when I was at Deloitte, I actually did campus recruiting. So there was a couple of times where I would go to UCF and we had, tables with stuff about Deloitte, and I would speak to students about Deloitte and things that we would do, the projects that I would work on. And it was really interesting. Doing that. I wish I could do that more now. Actually, I feel like talking to students, it's awesome because when you speak to some, it's like they don't know what the world has to offer, and then you just go and you're like, "Look, this is how things are. These are things you should do." And it's like giving them advice and even telling them things that they don't know anything about. And I feel like it's just awesome when you can give people advice. Yeah, not everybody's gonna take it, which is fine, but you can try your best. And there was this one student was like, should I do computer science or actually there was this girl that she was like, should I graduate with my computer science degree or and do software engineering or get a master's in math? And I was like, get your master's in math. And the reason I said this is because if you're the type of person that you really want to do a master's, I feel like that is going to stick with you for the rest of your life. You're always going to want to do the master's. You're going to find a job. But if you really want a master's, you're going to be 35 years old saying, man, I wish I would have done the master's.
Should have done it.
Should have done it, yes.
Yeah.
So I told her, I was like, just do the master's in math. Don't worry, like there's gonna be jobs available for you. Don't even worry about if you're in school right now, you're fine. Another 2 years getting a master's, as long as you can afford it and as long as that's something, you're really interested in, just do it. And she ended up, doing the master's in math. Which, for me, I kind of want to do my math. And I've always wanted to do my master's. And I do want to do my master's most likely in computer science, but the way when I think about it now, I'm like, man, I should have done it right away and gotten it over with. And that's kind of my mentality of, if you want to do something really, really bad, I don't feel like that's going to really go away. Going back to campus recruiting, I've spoken to many students, and even when I was at helping all the students, and I would constantly give them advice on courses they should take, how they should, navigate their college career. I always felt like I had that interest in me. And even now, I'm really good at reading resumes. And if people, have questions, how should I write my resume or how should I do this in my career? I kind of like giving people advice. I'm kind of the type of person where if you're like, oh, I want to be a doctor, I'm like, okay, this is how you do it. Follow that and you'll be able to do it.
Do it.
So yeah. And yeah, like I said, I've always also had this positive attitude, which is so weird, where I felt like I could do anything. Yes. Like if I wanted to be a doctor, I could just be a doctor. Like yes. I know I could be a doctor. I'm just not a doctor because I don't want to be a doctor.
Yes, I'm the same. Yeah. I agree. Yes.
And and it's so weird because the more I go through life and I learn things, and I'm just like, I'm getting so good at computer science that I can see where I can end up in my career. And I'm like, all I have to do is just put in the work, learn. But if I do this with anything else, I can do that. So I feel that's why I have that mentality of if I wanted to be anything, I could do and be anything. because it's not like there's no career that is not like 90% of the population can't do. Every career is mostly like a job. People just studied it for a really long time and they dedicated all these hours and they were able to get to that level. And I feel like if I, you know, I can do a lot of things. You know, not to brag or anything, but I know how to surf. I've played, when I was in high school, I was in band, and so I played trumpet, I played French horn, I know how to play drums. I used to play at church, and I can do these things. So I know that if I just dedicated more time on these things, I can be really, really good. And these are just all random things at the end of the day, and that gives me that attitude of, hey, if I put my mindset on something, I know I can achieve it and be super great at it. And also, it also comes back to the that mentality that when people say, oh, they have the imposter syndrome, I
Hmm.
actually never really feel that way because maybe okay, when I was in college, I never felt smart, but everybody would ask me questions. And I always felt like I was always answering people's questions.
You were tutored.
And
So
yeah, yeah well, besides that, even when I was at UCF, like a lot of my classes, people were, asking questions, and it made me realize, I'm not that smart. There's, it, I don't know. There's this thing of, like I said, I'm a realist, but I'm better usually, or you're usually better than you think you are.
yes.
And for a lot of people, if you're actually focused on something, because a lot of people can just go surfing and be like, oh, I'm good. No, but if you're actually dedicated and you're putting that time all the time and you're doing it, you're probably doing this more than 95% of the people in the US. So you're going to become better than most people
Hmm.
if you put that time. So it just came a point where, I was in college and I'm like, all these people are asking me questions and I'm answering them. I'm not saying I'm the smartest, but maybe I am smarter than my brain is telling me I am. And I
Hmm.
shouldn't worry about it because so many people are probably struggling more than I am. And
Hmm.
in UCF, all my classes are actually curved. So a lot of people were always freaking out saying, oh, I have a 50 in this class or I have a 60 in this class. And I always said, I'm pretty sure there's no way 50% of the people have more than 50%. So I'll be fine. And I was always right. And I always ended up getting like maybe a B or like an A or B. There was times where I got a C's too. I wasn't like this super great student. I didn't like to study things I wasn't interested in. I think that was always my issue. I was always like, if I'm interested in this, I put 100%. But if I'm not interested in it, um, then I'm not gonna study it. And I also feel like that's what makes the difference between really smart students, between people who are just passionate. When you're really smart, you're willing to put the time on things that you're not interested in, which I admire that about those type of people. But when you're just passionate about certain things, you discard the things you're not interested in and you're only focused on the things that you're actually really interested in. So for
Hmm.
me, there were certain classes, like when I took differential equations, I was so interested in that course. I actually ended up getting the highest grade in um
The class.
actually getting an A and the at the highest grade in the differential equations class. But then when I took computer architecture, I was not interested at all in the course. I ended up getting a C, uh, and I just never really wanted to study. So, within my path of learning how people think, you learn that there's different types of people. You have these certain types of people that are really, really smart. Why are they smart? There's people that are not that they're not smart, but they are probably just more passionate about these things and not passionate about other things, so they tend to focus. And
Hmm.
it's kind of even like a quote where I hear where, why do smart people not have a lot of money? And
Mm.
that's because most people that are smart thinks of all these obstacles. Let's say you want to be an entrepreneur. If you're smart, you're going to think of all the things that could go wrong.
Right.
But if you're not as smart, you just do it.
You just do it.
And that's the thing, you just have to do it. So you have this person who maybe is not that intelligent as you, and they're doing the work, they're getting the stuff done, and their business is doing well, but you haven't even started because you're thinking of all these things that could go wrong, which is true because being an entrepreneur, you can at the end of is very high risk. So if it's really high risk, then you're being smart about it.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it doesn't work out.
No, because if you don't do anything, you'll never. If you don't try,
Yes.
you'll never succeed, right?
Yes.
So like, you can sit there and overthink things like, oh, I have to do this. Oh, wait, maybe I shouldn't do it. You know.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's so that's for me. Like I said, I actually bought this book. I should send you this book. It's like a book about intellectualism, and it kind of goes through how people really think. Because I just love you know about all these prestige and people being smart. How people get into Ivy Leagues, and I've just learned all these ways. There's no wrong way to learn. I mean, not to say there isn't, but everybody has their own preferred way of learning. Let me say that. We all have to adapt to learn how to be successful in the learning path. And like I said, some of the things I've learned from this camp are, hey, you have to learn how to learn things you don't like. Some things I've learned maybe from another camp is other things. So there is, I think, right and wrong ways to learn, because let me not say every way to learn is correct, but you can learn something from different ways that people learn. And obviously you're your own person. So you're like, this is the way it works best for me. And then you apply that and try things out. And it's you applying different methods and see what works for you. Some people are visual, some people are, non-visual. So you got to see, even like I said, when I had that epiphany for building software, a lot of the times reading certain books, things never clicked for me. I didn't understand how these things could be fit together, and I could never build these programs by myself. And for some reason, someday it hit me. I was able to now build these systems by myself without any help, and something probably the way I was conceptualizing it in my mind, finally clicked. And I want to continue, learning different ways. Like you have, all these people who can memorize, like the guy that memorized the pi
Oh,
3.14,
I was
like
just
all
thinking
the
that.
numbers.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, ridiculous. Yes.
It's ridiculous. But I think like his brain and your brain, I'm sure there's a method that maybe you can do that too. There could be the possibility that maybe his brain is tilted a little different and a little skewed, but I still think there's a possibility that maybe there's a method he's using that we haven't discovered yet.
Right. I mean, there must be. Right? How's he doing it?
Yes, yes. Okay, and that's why I love talking about Richard Feynman, because I feel like he was this regular guy and he completely figured out how to learn electrodynamics, and he completely, like I said, like in my mind, like I told you, I have this architecture. I can go down, but I can also expand it. And then when he was able, I don't know if I forgot what he was able to. He got like a Nobel Prize or something for something in electromagnetism. But he was able to like draw these diagrams that made complete sense. But how can you even do that if you can't see these things? But the way he did it, it works perfectly together within physics, within, quantum mechanics. And, one of the things he says is you learn best by teaching. He gives a whole bunch of points of how to learn. And, those are some of the things. I actually read one of the books that he had back in early in college, and I kind of try to follow the method to really learn how to learn myself, intellectually. And another thing to add is also when I would learn things, I would write things down on a piece of paper, which is awesome. And you should
Mm-hmm.
write things on a piece of paper, but you should actually try to. I think with the rise of technology and Google, I still think memorization is still something that we should be doing. Because right now, if me and you are going to have an intellectual conversation on religion, for example, me telling you what this passage says is going to make me look better than if you said, oh, I don't really know what it says. I'll have to look it up. You see?
Right.
So I still think, yes.
Yes.
So I still think in this day and age, memorization still matters.
Mm-hmm.
So what I try to do a lot of times is instead of just writing things down or saying, oh, maybe I can look at that later on, is no, sit down, think about it in your mind, speak about it with your mouth,
Mm-hmm.
and act like there's a child there and explain it to them.
Mm-hmm.
Because we as humans, at the end of the day, you're not going to be looking at a book at Google for a certain word, for a certain sentence. You want to have conversations with people and you want those things to already beat in your head and you want to know how all that works. And even for me, just like computers, even for me, the whole world, for me, like I have it in different sections of like, this is the 90s, this is the 1800s, this was the Roman Empire, which was like couple centuries BC to like the 1400s. Then you have the Greek era, and for me, I kind of all put it outward, and then I have all the books I've read. It's like I have all these people in all these categories, so I can go to like the 1800s and be like, so in 1812, you have the War of 1812, you have the British fighting, the Americans, you have the French coming, but at the same time, you have George Washington. I actually read a book about Brown University, and I was like, at the same time, Brown University ended up canceling school because of the war, and people actually were in Rhode Island at that time. And that's why I think reading a lot of books is so amazing, because now you start putting all these things together, and then the entire human existence kind of comes together in your head, and you can actually conceptualize how every point in time works together. So I don't know. I love reading books, and each time I read a book, I kind of put it in one of the sections that I have, and I stop and I say, what was also happening at this point in time? When I was reading that book of Brown University, I was at the point where it's the 1800s. I said, what was happening right now? Every book I've read, what was happening? And then I can see and maybe understand what those people were going through, why they were thinking what they were thinking. And then I read the book, and a lot of things just make more sense to me of why maybe people made certain decisions. Maybe maybe it was a religious thing. Maybe the community was very religious. Maybe the community wasn't very religious. And you get to understand all these things and all these topics, at the end of the day. And I feel like reading a lot of books is something that we should all be doing constantly, and knowing. And just to even from a physics perspective, in 1812, we didn't even know atoms. I don't believe we knew even what atoms were and
Right.
existed. And how do you conceptualize that just in 100 years we have quantum mechanics, but back then we didn't even know what an atom was.
It's pretty amazing.
And yeah, and science was so at its beginning, at its infancy, of what it was and has become. So yeah, I don't know. It's reading books is really, really, really interesting. I love reading all types of books, philosophy, obviously computer books. I love religion, so I read a lot of religion books. And then history books in general. I love learning things that have happened. I it's crazy because I actually don't think we live in a really bad, and like in our era, we're actually living better than a lot of people have in general.
I
There
think this
were
is the
so
best
many.
era. I think
Yes, it is.
I think
Yes,
it's the best
yes,
era. We
it
were
is.
living in the best. I mean, imagine living 200 years ago. I mean, they didn't
Yes,
even have.
there's
I mean, a lot of stuff we have today they didn't
yeah,
have.
yes.
It
And
was
actually,
just.
when
Oh, go
and
ahead. So,
actually when COVID, when no, you're good. When COVID came out, I actually bought this book called, oh my God, I forgot the name of the book, but it was a book about the history of viruses. And I learned so much about viruses. I was blown away. And almost every decade or every century, pretty much, there was some type of pandemic or epidemic that was going on in different places, and there was no type of vaccine. Vaccines in general are new. They're actually within the past 100 years that we actually found out what virus were. If you lived in 1812, you didn't know what a virus was. We just knew about bacteria.
People would just die.
And
It's
yeah,
horrible. It's
and
horrible.
it is crazy. And after reading this book, I kind of understood all the suffering and all the things that these people have gone through in their life, um, all the wars. Like now, compared to back then, we don't have that many wars.
Mm-mm.
Like the whole, right now, all we have is, maybe other wars that we haven't really heard about, but the main war right now is Ukraine and Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But back then, you had people constantly fighting over everywhere all the time. And all these viruses attacking people, every century or yeah, pretty much every century, you had some type of pandemic going on.
No air conditioning. I mean, just
Yeah, it's like, yeah. And
just
it's crazy because when I was learning about viruses, the only way we can really eradicate a virus is if that virus doesn't infect an animal. Because if you can infect an animal, then we can't test every animal.
mm.
So the thing is that animal can spread it around forever. But if it's only within the humans, then we can actually, let's say we know that 5 humans within this area have it. We can actually put these humans together. Once the virus is over, then we know it can't spread anywhere else. So it's really interesting to know that there are viruses that are contagious to animals and some that aren't. And the ones that aren't, we can eradicate them. But the ones that can be, the viruses can, oh my God, Jesus, I just lost my
It's okay.
my thought process again. They can be contagious within animals, then they can't be eradicated.
Right, because we can't test them all.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the
So
future. The future.
yeah.
Just to switch gears, because I wanted to ask you this earlier, and what do you think
Yeah, no
about
worries.
AI? AI. What do you think is going to happen? Like, is it
Yeah.
bad? Is it good? Dangers? I
I
mean,
I think right now is good, but I think it'll eventually become bad. First of all, I think a lot of people have this concept. I think most people are like, "Oh, it's not going to take our jobs." We made the computer, and there's been more jobs than ever. Which I think what AI can do right now is complement me and make me better. But the issue is that I've tested AI, and there's things like Copilot, which you can tell it, program me this in a program, it'll make me 10 times better. So let's say I'm working at a company. If I can do certain tasks 10 times faster, now you don't need to hire as many people. It's not necessarily going to displace a lot of jobs. You're just not going to need to hire as many people anymore. So I feel like we're going to come to this point within the next 10 years where we're going to need less software engineers, but not necessarily senior or staff software engineers, mostly junior software engineers. I feel like tech is still going to have growth, but not within the junior engineering fields. I feel like AI is going to complement so many engineers. They're going to be able to do things way faster. And I feel like that's going to be like a normalization within the next 5 years, and it's going to be the new normal for the next maybe 10, 20 years. There's going to be new careers. Some careers are going to get affected, but I think we're going to need less software engineers in general. But you have to think that there is a point, because we all have to think as humans, what's the end point of growth. Like we've, as a human civilization, have always had population growth. We've
Mm-hmm.
always had growth as a human species. Can that growth ever stop? And it can. What do we do when we reach the end of the growth? Because the way, in a sense, capitalism works, the stock market works, it always goes up, but it
Mm-hmm.
always goes up because you have constant growth.
Mm-hmm.
So if we know, so for example, Apple right now sells iPhones. If there's constant growth, we know that they're going to keep doubling the amount of iPhones they have to make because there's constant growth.
Mm-hmm.
So Apple, so the stock, we know the stock market is going to go up in the next 10, 20, 30 years. Like
Mm-hmm.
we already know that. I literally just predicted the future. It's going to keep on going up. It is. If there's growth, think about if we have 100 people, all those 100 people are having babies. Now you're going to have 300 people. Those 300 people are going to have babies. Like there is constant growth. So that's good. But the growth is not going to last forever. How do I know? One of the reasons I can tell you growth is not going to last forever is because, first of all, we're seeing everywhere, especially Japan and South Korea, are having population decline. And that's the first time ever that some of these countries are actually having a population decline.
Do you know why?
So, um, immigrate. One of the reasons is immigration. So immigration is very difficult, uh, especially in Japan and in Korea. So a lot of people that come aren't there for a long time, and usually people that want to immigrate to a place, they want that freedom. And especially going to Japan is also harder. Look at where China is on the map compared to maybe the USA. Is easier to get to the USA versus Japan. Their immigration laws are a little bit more restrictive. So, but also it's the way they are as a species, as humans. China had that one child policy. Remember, there was a period of time where they had that one child policy. If things continue, they thought that once they ceased the one child policy and went back to normal, that population would grow again to a normal rate. And actually, in China, it hasn't. So if it doesn't go back to normal, they're expecting that their population in 2050 is going to go from 1 billion to 750 million.
Wow.
So there is a possibility that in all these areas of the world, you are going to get that population decrease. And the issue is that, if I'm not mistaken, if the population is decreased, if your population is not increasing by more than, I think it's like 1.6 or 2% a year, it's almost or nearly impossible to grow any more than that. And we're seeing that, especially in Japan and South Korea right now. So let's say that's a trajectory um, that's happening, because if we have growth, a normal growth, that means everybody's having babies. And also think about nowadays, more women are having babies in the old days. Why is that happening? Obviously, life is more expensive. Now people, women can work, where back in the day they didn't work. So then, and a lot of these women are having babies later. But also, if you have babies later, then you have the divide of, it's going to be harder for me to have a kid, or do I want to pick my career? So then, even in the USA, we still have growth, but if we have seen that if we continue on this path, where now all these women are going to work and not all of them are delaying having babies, then now we're going to have less and less birth rates. And that's how we continue as a human species to grow and have growth. And once you have growth as a human population, then that amplifies everything else. Companies keep on with the growth. Obviously, farmers, you need more policemen, you need more firefighters, and that's really great. But I do feel like there would be a point where that won't happen, anymore. And once that growth declines, um, then, capitalism doesn't work at the end of the day, because in capitalism, you need growth. What happens when you don't have growth anymore and everything is just declining? Let's say you have, uh, 300 people, but now next year you have 150, or let's say 150. Now you don't need any more iPhones. You don't need any more houses. So there's going to be a big supply of stuff. What are all those people going to do?
It's going to be a
Uh,
really bad economy.
yeah,
Really
yes,
bad.
it's going to be horrible.
It's
Yeah, it's going to
horrible.
be so bad. So yeah, those are things that I think we should be thinking in the future based on growth from an AI perspective, which I didn't get to in the future, because I think we'll be fine in the next 20, 30 years, but maybe in the next 50, maybe not. Okay, think about a point within AI that everything is so efficient. Do you think there's a point that we can be so efficient as a society that you can't be any more efficient?
I don't know.
Because I think that we have grown so much and AI is going to grow so much that there will be a point where we as a society are going to be. The thing is that people say, oh, there's always room for improvement. But I think there is that moment in time in the future where there is no room for improvement. Like
It's just
we come to that,
so far, so advanced.
yeah, yeah, so advanced that everything is nearly perfect. And, maybe that will be when AI is, fully as a robot, and maybe there are maids, maybe they're taking care of our kids. I think these things will happen. Just think how far we've gotten in the past year, with AI in general. I think so many companies are working on AI that at the pace that AI is going to uh, be in our lives, it is just going to be it's going to be faster than we expect. It might be at the same level as the computer. Every year, every 2 years, we ended up getting more memory in our computers. Things got cheaper, and I feel like it's going to be the same way with AI. But that point of everything is so efficient, AI is almost like a human, and you can talk to it, and it knows all your life, and it's taking care of your kids. I think that's a point where it might get kind of scary,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, but I think that will happen. And you know, I've worked in a lot of and to add to, I've worked in a lot of companies where okay, actually before I say this, Elon Musk proved something. He laid off over 80% of Twitter.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Oh, you didn't know that? So
That's a
so
lot of
Elon
people.
Musk, yes. So Elon Musk bought Twitter. He Once he bought Twitter, he laid off I think it was 80% of the company. And the company's functioning fine.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found out is I worked at a lot of these companies at Deloitte, Microsoft, and there are people not doing that much, getting paid to do the bare minimum to a certain extent. And I think he proved that most companies don't need most people they have.
Interesting.
So what's going to happen when a lot of these companies decide, hey, we're not playing around anymore. You have to be efficient. If not, we're going to lay you off. And I feel like most companies can lay off 20, 30, 40% right now, and they'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think that.
Mm-hmm.
And let's assume that that were to happen tomorrow. These companies will still be efficient. Now they're making more money because they're not paying as many employees, but what are all these people going to do?
Yeah, they're not gonna have jobs.
Yes. So that's a future that I also see. The thing is that everything I'm telling you, the future doesn't look so bright.
No, it doesn't look so good. Well,
So
what about the stock market? So if the companies do good, the market will go up, right?
yes. Um, yes. So if the companies will do good, but the thing is that you have to also look at unemployment rate. So there is a point where, people are looking at interest rates. So everybody was looking at interest rates 2022, interest rates rose by a substantial amount. We went from about 25 basis point, raised them up, and now we're about 5%, 5.25%. If you can see, last year the market dropped heavily. The most has dropped, pretty much since 2020. So people saw that as, oh, hey, interest rates, are very high. But guess what? That high has stayed high, but unemployment is low. So
Mm-hmm.
they know that people are still finding jobs, are going to contribute to the 401k, are going to contribute to stocks. So now, if you look this year, stocks are up, I think, close to 15%.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been this big, big, big rebound. And let's say you have this constant, and we're going to have constant growth, which continue seeing. So a lot of these companies are going to keep on making money. I don't know at what percentage of the unemployment rate we need to get to where people can't find any more jobs. Because right now it seems like people are getting laid off, but unemployment rate is still low.
It's so low.
I want to know at what percentage, because let's say that is 10%. If we reach 10% and more people get laid off and these people can't work anymore, now they're going to get unemployment from the federal government for a certain amount of time. But what are you going to do when those people can't find jobs anymore? And I don't know what that answer is. I don't know what you do with a society. And that's why people have talked about universal basic income, saying that it's probably inevitable. Do you eventually come to that point where unemployment is so high, there's not enough jobs that you just have to give people money? Because that's the only way people can survive. Is that the path we're taking? And something else that I wanted to add was also our debt. We have so much debt.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody in the history of any empire or nation has had as much debt as we do. And we're still printing money. We just raised the debt limit. Also, what's the number where it all just has to crash? Can we just be in $100 trillion debt? $500 trillion? No, there is a number that's going to make it crash at all, right? Like you cannot have infinite debt.
Infinite debt. I mean, it's just a number,
Yes.
right? So I mean, isn't it just
Yeah.
they just raise it? So it's it's
Yes.
just let's raise
Yeah.
it. I mean, it's all
Yeah.
fictional, right? I mean, in some
So
sense.
well, so that's the thing. Right now we're whatever. I think it's like 34 trillion amount of debt, and every couple of years the debt limit increases. The thing is that now with interest rates so high,
Mm-hmm.
the debt that we have, the thing is that we're paying our debt with debt. So let's say we owe this debt, we actually get debt to pay that debt.
So
And
bad.
then but this debt that we just grabbed is now at 5%. So the
Mm-hmm.
debt that we're now appreciating is so high in interest that there's going to be a point where it's just going to be way too high.
Way too
And
high.
if you do the math, maybe you can figure out maybe what is too high. The United States makes their income. Let's say the Treasury, which let's call that's the Treasury is the United States. They make their income by taxes. The number one way, taxes. And we just don't make enough taxes to pay our debts, and pay all our obligations. So the only thing you also see in the future is high taxes,
Mm-hmm.
really high taxes, for corporations, for employers, for employees, for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
because we're not going to be able
Mm-hmm.
to sustain that amount. And the only way you can do that is by raising a lot of the money, by raising taxes, pretty much, because that's the main way, they get their income.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how this is all going to play out because, like I said, I'm pointing to you a lot of negatives. I do hope that the future is positive, but I don't see it being too positive. I mean, but when you think about it, we as humans have always been resilient at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
You had the Roman Empire collapsed, but we stayed strong.
Mm-hmm.
You had, I think it was the Black Death. what was it
Mm-hmm.
called when there was
The
this big,
bubonic plague.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
when it was like almost like a third of Europe or something like that died.
Mm-hmm.
Like we as a human species are resilient. So even though I see all this negativity in the future, even if the United States were to collapse, even if we had so much debt that we couldn't pay off and we defaulted on our debt and there was hyperinflation, we will be resilient enough to still live our day to day and be fine. I I don't see a case where everybody goes crazy, everybody dies. I don't. I just from an economics perspective,
Mm-hmm.
it is troubling. It is bad. I think it will end bad, but as a human species, we will be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that I am concerned about from a human species perspective is a growth perspective. Because if there's no growth, and the population decreases, there will be a point where we can't make enough babies to sustain the human population, and then we can technically predict when the human population will end,
Mm-hmm.
technically. That's my only concern. And but then you also have to put in, and maybe that's why being in politics is probably really interesting right now, because how are you going to resolve the issue of wanting more humans to give birth? How do you solve that issue?
Oh
Because
wow.
right now things are so expensive, and a lot of millennials aren't buying as as houses like they used to back in the day because houses are so expensive. Uh, you have all these people in these other countries. I think Canada's housing is even worse than it is in the US and in Australia. I think Australia and Canada have it way worse than they do in the United States, and all these people just don't have enough money or make enough to support themselves and a family. So it seems like not only because of certain political um choices that these countries have made, also the the economically, the choices that have made it impossible for people to have kids. And as a humanity, you don't want to see any type of uh, growth decline in the future, because at the end of the day, you can, like I said, I read a book about population decline, and those are where I got some of the statistics from that I told you about. And especially South Korea and Japan right now are falling the fastest. And if I'm not mistaken, Japan is the first one to, if we continue through this path and statistically, if the numbers continue, Japan would be probably one of the first nations to completely not produce any more Japanese babies.
Wow.
Um, so I don't know. I think being in politics right now is very interesting because there's a lot of problems to solve. There's a lot of problems that you know, that's the thing with me. Like, I technically don't feel like I can make a big impact in a lot of these choices. Yeah, I can vote, and I feel like that's the best thing I can do. But at the end of the day, I I also think about philanthropy in the sense of you can also donate and give to people that you believe and support. Because at the end of the day, we don't make the choices. We kind of vote and give money to people that we hope can make those decisions for us. But
Mm-hmm.
if anybody, is interested in politics, we're coming to a point where there is a lot of questions and a lot of decisions that need to be made soon. And even like topics like climate change, how is that working out? And how are we going to solve that? There's just so many things going on right now that the future can look even worse than I just said, or it can actually look better.
Right. Yeah.
And so yeah, and it's like, what are we gonna do to solve that? The only I think a lot of things could be solvable. I think the growth perspective can be solvable. I think the two things that I think are unsolvable is AI and the U.S. debt, and that's because as a us, we love technology so much. These companies are So many companies are working on AI that we're just gonna make it so advanced where it will come this point where we could even be integrated with AI. And just the fact that it doesn't seem like the US cares about our debt. Like we're just spending and we don't care.
Yeah, it's like they just
And
raise it. It's just
yeah,
raise the number.
yeah, and
Hmm.
those I thought I those two things are on like we're not gonna be able to save. We're gonna default eventually one day, and either it's gonna be hyperinflation, and but like I said, even if there's hyperinflation, even if there's a, an attack, like I said, we as a human species are resilient. Think about World War II.
Oh yeah.
Even the Germans still came up. They got destroyed, but they still rebuilt their cities. They still rebuilt their countries. Venezuela right now is has really bad hyperinflation, but guess what? They're still living their day to day lives, and like that quote says, easy times brings, um, or hard times brings tough people, and like easy times. Uh, I forget the quote. Oh, you don't know the quote?
Nah, I'm gonna
Oh
have
my
to
God.
Google it later.
Yeah. It's like it goes something like that. It's like easy times brings soft people, and like hard times brings tough people, or something like that. So yeah, I we there is a lot that is very interesting to me, and I'm looking forward to see how we solve these problems if we can.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting. Awesome. Thank you.
So,
It was so interesting. Such a good talk.
yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And if
good.
you have any other questions or
Uh no, I think that's it. I think that's it. I mean, thanks for
okay.
coming on here. It's so interesting. Good catching up. Good talking to you.
Yeah, it was good catching up.
It's
If
awesome.
at any time you want to talk again, I'm
Yeah.
always willing to give my opinion and talk about just anything in general.
Yeah, I'm gonna go read about population growth now. I'm like, oh my god. Your AI comments
No,
are
yeah,
so interesting. The AI
no,
stuff you're
really.
saying is very interesting. It's interesting.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank
it's
you.
really
No,
blowing up.
yeah, it is. No, I'm gonna send you the book of the population decline,
Okay.
and I'm gonna send you the book about the viruses too. The virus book is really small. And yeah, and for AI, yeah, I do. That's kind of my opinion. Where right now, it's going to complement our work. I think as a society, we're going to do really well in the next 10, 20 years. You know, like I said, there's not going to be as many engineers getting hired, I feel like, just like many other industries in general. Like you might not, I don't think we're going to need that many accountants either. We're not going to need uh, as many people in finance as we need. AI is taking over a lot of these companies. A lot of these companies are building their own AI. You have Bloomberg making their own AI with the Bloomberg terminal. Microsoft has their own. Google has their own. Even Citi has their own. So every company is building their own AI to work with their, and even think about, I don't know if you heard it called robo advisors.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you want a 401k, you need help, you can talk to an AI and they just trade for you. And now you don't need to talk to a customer representative or to like a sales rep or someone to handle these things for you that you probably would have done on a day-to-day basis. Now you're gonna have machines and AI just do all these things for you at the end of the day. And now you're not going to need as many people. So the
Yeah.
thing is, what do you do as a college student? I still think that computer science is still important. I think is mostly at the end of the day, I have felt like in life is how good you can problem solve in any situation. It doesn't matter if you're working with computers. It doesn't matter even, oh, actually, I want to add even emotional intelligence because when I'm living life on a day to day basis, I go to work. In my job, I have humans and I have computers. And I have to learn how to navigate to intellectually talk to a computer, but also handle humans. So, how can you put those together? And after work, I come home, I have my girlfriend, and you also have to, deal with that person. Are you gonna, sometimes you come in, maybe you're in a good mood, maybe they're in a good mood, and having that emotional intelligence of how to deal with people on a day to day basis is super, super important. So if you're in college, I would say do something that's difficult, that's gonna make you learn how to problem solve, but also at the same time learn how to manage people because you're working with people, you're talking, I mean, you have family, you have friends, you're probably gonna have kids, you're probably gonna have a family. and you talk to people every single day.
Every day.
And obviously you want to be and try to be the best human that you can. You want to, I hope that you as a human want to be seen as someone that either people like, or just someone that you're, helping. You just don't want to be seen as someone who nobody likes. I think that's the goal for most of us, and if you can learn how to get good feedback and critique and how to handle that and improve on yourself constantly, because I've met so many smart people who, make dumb decisions when it comes to other humans. You could be like, oh, I'm an introvert, I don't like to talk to people. Maybe people think you're just, uh, I don't want to curse or anything, but maybe they think you're a dumbhead or something. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So, but you want to be this person where you're like, even if you don't like to talk to people, always try. You just have to try to put yourself out there and communicate. Unless you want to be solo for the rest of your life, then don't focus on emotional intelligence. But if you want to have a great career, you want to either manage people or you even want to have a good marriage in general, that other half of learning about humans, about experience, having those experiences. And, if I'm hanging out with you, for example, there's people that, I might see how your mood is. Maybe you're happy, maybe you're sad. I might react differently to that. Some
Mm-hmm.
people might react the same in the sense that they might not understand how you're feeling and just say whatever they want. If you're sad, maybe I'm not going to talk to you as often. Maybe I'm like, oh, he doesn't really want to talk.
Right.
Or if you're happy, maybe you do want to talk. But I do feel like there's a lot of people who don't have that emotional intelligence, actually,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually kind of surprising,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense. And then learning about relationships is really, really crazy, because think about all the friends, but all the friends that you have lost. And
Yes.
why did you lose? And actually, I've watched a lot of reality TV. And when I watch these reality TV, a lot of times when people stop becoming friends, one thing I've realized is that is all ego. And if those two people can just go together, say what they feel, and talk about it, all these problems can get resolved.
Yeah.
And in real life, I think is the same way, because let's say I have an argument with a friend. I'm just gonna be like, I don't want to talk to that person anymore. You just have to put your ego aside, and the only reason I think relationships work better over maybe relationships is because when you like somebody like when you're in a committed relationship, you like that person where you have to kind of put your ego aside. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
when you have a friend or have friends, you don't put that ego aside,
Right.
and that is what is detrimental in a sense. Where maybe those moments where you do need to put your ego aside, you don't, and that's what can make that friendship fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy, because it's
No.
not. And we've all been mad at somebody.
Yeah.
Sometimes people do things to us, or maybe we've done things to people, and it's and it's very weird, because in this camp where you have problem solving mathematically is very is not ambiguous or as abstract as the emotional one. Because
Yes.
in this one, you have to guess. And in the math one, in the problem solving this way, there is a right answer. Like 1 plus 1 is 2.
Right.
In this one plus one is not necessarily 2.
Right. I think it can be
And
learned, though. It can be learned. You can learn emotional intelligence.
yes,
I
yes,
think by having more
yes, you can
experiences and
learn.
yeah. But I
Yes.
agree. I think it's harder
Um,
to
yes,
some
yes, yes,
extent.
it is. Yes. No, no, I do agree. I do agree. No, but when you think about even like Einstein was an amazing physicist, but when you look at his life, if I'm not mistaken, he cheated on his wife.
Oh
He
wow.
had a kid with his cousin. Um, yeah. If I'm not mistaken, yeah, he cheated on his
Wow.
wife. He had a
Wow.
kid with his cousin, and he was like it wasn't the best uh like human life if you looked at it from that perspective. And I looked at that and I'm like, so many people praised him for his physics and for the things he did in this area, but when it comes to the way maybe he treated his wife or his kids, it wasn't that great.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, how can someone be so smart in this area, but maybe not so smart in this area? And that's what makes me think. It made me think in the sense that I was like, being smart is not only mathematical, it's also this other part that might even be, like you said, it might be even more difficult
Mm-hmm.
to handle. And the thing is that, oh, actually, I'm gonna add this too. One reason that I think that the emotional is harder is because um so we as a human species are born and live in this world on Earth, correct? And since we live on Earth, the main purpose of us living and all the animals living is what? Reproduction. So since it's reproduction for us to make babies and reproduce, then Earth has to make it has to make our feelings so strong that we have to make babies. That's why when we fall in love, the emotion is that strong
Right.
because that's Earth making you want to have a baby because that's the whole purpose of nature
Of nature, yeah.
to just
Animals.
reproduce.
If you look at the birds, that's all they
Yes,
want to do. They just want
yes,
to like
that's all they
live.
want to do. Yes, but the only way the only way the Earth can push that to us is by forcing our emotions to be so strong that we're forced to do sexual activities. And that's why those emotions, when you're either you like someone or you're in love, are so strong. And those emotions can obviously cloud your decision making sometimes because it's just do it,
Right.
because that's what life wants from us. And it's crazy to just like learn about the fact that sometimes things are within us aren't necessarily controlled by
No.
us.
No, it's part of us. It's just who we are
Yes, it's
as
part of us.
humans. Yeah,
Yep.
definitely. It's
Yep.
like, yeah, we
Yeah.
try to fight it. You know, our logic says no, that's not a good idea, right? Like, wait a minute, you know, maybe this
Yep.
isn't a good idea. I probably shouldn't go out with her or whatever. Or, you know, maybe I shouldn't go
Yeah.
on
Yep.
that date for
That's a bad decision.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's the logic
Yep.
side, right?
Yeah.
And then
But at the end of the day, nature doesn't care.
nature doesn't
All
care.
nature wants is you to find someone to reproduce. And it doesn't matter how toxic, how non-toxic that person is, it's gonna do everything in its power to make that possible. And I feel like and I feel like we're also coming to a generation where, like I said, we're having babies later. So there's something going on in our generation that I feel like is different, and it's been different than any other generation. You know, you had a lot of women back then had babies earlier on when
Hmm.
they were really young. And for the first time ever, because it's really for the first time ever, women aren't having kids so young. And you know, I'm not saying that it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that I wonder how this plays out because this has never happened before. So I
Hmm.
wonder what's going to happen. It's are because supposedly women, by the time they're 30 and 35, you know, they don't produce as many eggs.
Hmm.
Would this change? Is that going to change? Can maybe now they have babies when they're older, or maybe not?
Maybe not.
Maybe their bodies are going to not adapt, because usually, you know, the body adapts in a lot of sense. You know, the body adapts to certain circumstances, and will the women's body adapt to that, or maybe it won't? Would it be where now everybody in general is having kids at a later stage?
Hmm.
um can that be possible as a human experience? And I don't know, you know, how that plays out.
Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
We talked about everything except nuclear war, so we didn't go there. But
Yeah.
because you were talking about the extinction of the
I
Earth, I was like, "What about a nuclear
Yes.
war?" So,
I mean, I think obviously a lot of countries like North Korea are experimenting, China, Russia, United States. I don't. see it happening. And the reason I don't see it happening is obviously we saw what happened in Japan in World War II. And the fact that everyone has nuclear wars, I mean, not everyone, but the big countries, big nations, we know what that's capable of doing.
Mm-hmm.
And China knows that if they send something off, we're going to send something off. It's going to be just so catastrophic to the human race that I don't think anyone is even willing to try it. I feel like if you are, um, a president or a leader of a nation, and you pull that on a country, that's your deathbed. You're
Mm-hmm.
done.
You're done. You're done.
I think
Yeah.
the nuclear bombs that we have nowadays are so powerful that no country is gonna just take that lightly. And that's why I don't see us ever getting into a nuclear war. I mean, I don't even know why North Korea is even trying,
Yeah, you see it on the news
because
all the
they've been like
time. It's
trying. Yeah, you
yeah.
see all the time. Yeah, they're always trying with a new rocket, and I don't even, to tell you the truth, I don't even see the point. Unless you're like, you want to protect yourself, unless someone bombs you and you're just like, retaliate. But I don't see that going well for anyone on Earth. So that's why I don't think that will ever happen. I think if we're gonna become extinct, either we get hit by a meteor or something is gonna happen. I just don't see uh, a nuclear event happening anytime.
Yeah. UFOs. There was that thing with the UFOs recently. I don't know if you saw that on the news. I
Yeah,
didn't. I didn't. I didn't watch the
yeah,
video,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah, that's
I don't.
a.
Yeah, I don't know how. Um, the UF if there's like life out there. Um, it is crazy. Oh, actually, not to diverge.
No,
I was
diverge.
reading a
Go
book
ahead.
about physics,
Uh
and I
huh.
was reading a book about physics and about quantum entanglement, where um, they saw that there's certain particles that if you turn this particle to the left, there's another particle, an identical particle, that would actually go in the opposite direction. So that made me think, you know, are things being controlled in this world if scientists have found that certain particles no, actually they've said that every particle has another complementary particle that does the opposite of what this particle does.
Hmm.
And when I was reading about it, I was really interested in what this could mean, and really reading about all these books about quantum mechanics and physics. And it's just so interesting to me that there's just so much we haven't figured out, and this is something that has been recently figured out within the quantum space, that there is just so much out there that we have yet figured out.
Oh yeah, so much.
And one thing that I do also, that's kind of sad, but back in the 1800s, in the early 1900s, a lot of people were discovering physics, but nowadays we don't see that as often.
Mm-mm.
And one of the reasons I think that has happened, is not because we don't have enough smart people. It's just that a lot of people have kind of left academia and gone to the workforce. You know, back then, a lot of people didn't get paid as much, going, doing research. I felt like was probably an easier path to take back then than probably it is now. And now, you have a PhD right away, a hedge fund wants to grab you so you can do these models. And they're like, hey, we'll pay you $300,000 to do this. And they're willing to do it. And I feel like there is so much brain power available, and we can find new physics. And we just have it. And it's not because we're not smart enough. It's not because there's not new physics to find. I just think that we're in a society currently that incentivizes
Mm-hmm.
money over academia right
Oh
now,
yeah, definitely.
and
Yeah.
it is very unfortunate, because, like I said, the more I've reading that physics book about quantum mechanics and quantum entanglement, these things are still rather new, and learning how much we haven't discovered yet. But the thing is that in the past 20, 30 years, if I'm not mistaken, there hasn't been much discovered. Like now we want to expand on the Hadron Collider in Sweden. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's where it is. We want to expand on that to see if we can find new particles. But it's kind of unfortunate, I feel like, in a sense, that as a society, we can, and we are improving with technology, but I feel when it comes to the space of mathematics and physics, we haven't given it the light of day to be as progressive as it should be.
Mm-hmm.
So those are kind of my thoughts on that perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. It's a good point, though. I feel like back then, like even in the 50s and 40s and 30s, like it was just it was a better choice than today, right? So today, I mean, if you have a PhD, you can go somewhere else. Like you said, you can go work at a hedge fund for $300K, or you can get a postdoc and make 60. I mean, it's like,
and
so
even
a lot of people don't do it.
The guy who created the Higgs boson and Richard Feynman, they still lived in the 70s and the 80s. I think the guy that created the Higgs boson just died recently. Feynman was alive in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and all these people did a lot of great work in the physics field. The one of the guys who discovered the Fermat's theorem, I think that was in the 90s. But ever since then, there just hasn't been much. And you don't really see any new physics really come out in the last, like I said, 20 years has been kind of silent in that industry. So I kind of wonder where in the next 20, 30 years, things will get better and improve. But what we need to do is, I think what we should do is the universities should pay more. Obviously, it's very difficult because, I feel like a lot of people don't understand how endowments work. But if Harvard has an endowment of $5 billion, and let's say the endowment is only for the computer science department, they can only use that money for the computer science department. You're not allowed to use it anywhere else. So the money is not equally distributed to different sections. So that's why people say, oh, Harvard has an endowment of like 40 billion. Yeah, they do. But the thing is, they can't just use that money for anything. They can only use that certain portions of the money for certain portions of things. So I wish there was a way that they can have enough funding for researchers and for all these universities to have researchers where they can compete with the hedge funds and they can compete with these other firms. They go in there, they do the research, and I feel like that is going to help us even more as a society. Because at the end of the day, how, we build computers because we found how to make these devices using physics and mathematics and etc. So that's kind of my thought process on it. I don't know if there is a solution. I just hope that in the future we can come to a resolution on that.
Yeah, I think it'll backtrack at some point. Something will happen in history. Something will come out and they'll say, "Hey, wait a minute, we need more physicists." There'll be something where there's a big push. Yeah, things change.
I agree.
You can hear me, okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool, awesome. Well, thank you.
No, this was a great talk.
That was awesome. So good. We broke 2 hours. So that's good.
All right, awesome.